Hey everyone, welcome back to the Wirex Podcast. I'm Lianna Adams, and today we're tackling a question that's been on a lot of minds. Where is journalism really headed? With Web3 promising decentralization and independence, and traditional media still holding its influence, what does the future of storytelling actually look like? To help us unpack this, I'm joined by Carina Schuster, an award-winning tech journalist who's been reporting on innovation and media for years. Carina, so glad to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. It's always exciting to join a podcast as a podcaster myself, of course.
Amazing. Maybe we can start with your professional background.
All right, sure. I feel like it's always very difficult to, to describe yourself because every year there's always some sort of evolution in terms of career-wise, but also in terms of human beings. But long story short, I'm a tech journalist, a podcast producer, also with a background in digital marketing and business development. I'm also the creator of SciTech Swiss, which is a podcast focusing on disruptive technologies. And I'm also an event moderator. I'm also a professional speaker. And I'm focusing on different kind of fields in terms of technology, such as AI, Web3. And I'm always excited about this kind of part, about the evolution of these technologies.
Amazing. And, let's start off with when people hear Web3 journalism, they often think of blockchain-based media or tokenized content. How would you define it in simple terms?
For me, I think that we have to go back to the term of what journalism means to all of us. And I think that what really saddens me as a journalist and as a content creator is probably the negative connotation that everyone has on everything in terms of journalism. And many times they think of journalism from this kind of perspective and they immediately just connect it to tabloids. And this is not true. And I think that being a tech journalism, to me, I'm very much focused on providing everything at the same speed, but also with accuracy. I will probably just point out that accuracy is most important to me. But when I think of Web3 journalism, I think it as a sort of decentralized approach to news and content creation, where we are leveraging blockchain technology, and we are ensuring that there's more transparency, ownership, and also more direct audience engagement, where people can contribute with more answers, and there's more freedom when it comes to ownership, unlike traditional media, which relies more on centralized organizations, on corporations, advertisers, or governments. I think that Web3 journalism is more revolutionary from this standpoint. And we just have to make sure that it's like more resistant to like censorship and bias. So when we think about like the key features of decentralization and transparency and direct monetization, I think that's what really differs, where journalism can earn their own money through tokenized incentives. When we think about NFTs, for example, or where we have like more community support rather than relying on just ad revenue, for example. That's what is really revolutionary about Web3 journalism, and it really differs from the traditional media field. But what I will add here is that we really need to redefine like what is really accurate news for us, what it really means, all of us, like what is the kind of content that is really adding a sense of value to you, what's really making you like waking you up in the morning and really motivating you to learn something new. That's also what was really inspirational for me when I created SciTech Swiss. Although it might still operate on the Web2, not in Web3, I think what's really revolutionary also when we think about the podcast, it has this sort of community value. I'm not trying to censor anyone. Like everyone is free to express their thoughts. Like when I was interviewing these tech leaders and experts, I always allow them to express themselves, to express their thoughts. freely. And I think that's also something revolutionary that I will connect to Web3 journalism and podcasts. I think that they are becoming the future. I think that's probably what's changing in terms of journalism. And when we think about traditional media, such as radio or TV stations, I think that at the time they seem to be revolutionary, but I think that in modern journalism, that it's adding value to these kind of technology tools. I think that it's more empowering. It's more sort of democratization of the news, if I'm explaining myself. And when we think about NFTs, for example, I think it's really revolutionary that you're able to really monetize your content through this kind of tokenization methods. And I think that it's more freely. And when we think about like different platforms and where we use also cryptocurrencies instead of relying to kind of these traditional media paychecks.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. But before we do that, what's one innovation in Web3 journalism that excites you the most?
Oh gosh, that's a brilliant question. I think that more one exciting innovation for me is probably decentralized fast checking when it comes like to using independent sources when it comes to this fast checking. That's something that I discussed also this year when I was reporting in Davos during the World Economic Forum. Because when we look at the reports, actually one of the biggest threats globally is misinformation and disinformation of the media. Because we really need to be careful in terms of technology advancements. Because at the same time, I always rely on the fact that okay, what is really important that we need to take into consideration also in the traditional media is really making sure that everything out there that it's actually posted away on the internet needs to be fast checked. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we have as journalists to make sure that everything out there has a meaning and is fast checked. And I think it's also getting like more challenging and difficult, especially with AI advancements. And we really need to make sure that we have all the sources and all the tools available for us. But what I would say here regarding to the question, I think that it's more Web3 journalism is, I think it has like a lot of potential increasing like transparency and credibility. And I think that having like multiple sources and fast checking tools, this is probably what it's really making it special. And one example is probably when we think about a decentralized news deal, like when we think about like more accuracy and more using, for example, a more token-based system when it comes to creating more reliability in terms of what we are reading. And of course, I always recommend checking multiple sources. And I think that we also have multiple platforms that we can take into consideration. They're also they're also functioning on machine learning systems, and where you have like, because when we think about the media, we think about like more biased sort of information where we have like, you will have to rely on multiple sources. But when you have like, I think that in terms of ensuring that there's trustworthiness and credibility, I think that it will be great to have like one of these platforms. And I also have a couple of examples here where you can probably have more, like you will probably search on a topic and you'll have like more sorts of information coming from different other media sources. But what I like about Web3, like Web3 journalism versus traditional journalism is that probably it's revolutionizing the way that we will be able to ensure that there's like more trustworthiness in terms of information, and we'll have like more sort of similar platforms in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because, some say that traditional journalism is dying, right, because of censorship, corporate interest, and loss of trust. Others argue that Web3 journalism is just a chaotic mess of unverified information. Which side is failing the most, do you think?
Oh gosh, that's a lot to unpack, as you mentioned before. I think that both models have weaknesses in different kind of ways. When we think about traditional journalism, it definitely struggles with censorship. It's also like you can really say that it's totally unbiased because there's some sort of corporate influence, and that's why it's also declining public trust. And of course, there's some sort of chaos. Like I feel like it needs like a proper structure. But also when we think about traditional journalism, I mean, Web3 journalism, it can be quite chaotic in sense of like how can we ensure that there's like no misinformation and like no misinformation that it's being spread online due to the lack of editorial oversight. So whereas like the authority establishing or saying that this information is true, like what are the sources that we need to double check? And I think that they're all some like intertwined or interconnected somehow, because you can say that traditional journalism is more important than Web3 journalism. I think that Web3 it will just be revolutionary in terms of a tool that will somehow like enable traditional journalism to be just to evolve, like to be revolutionary. Also, when I think about this statement from blockchain pioneer Gavin Woods that he wrote in 2014 about Web3 journalism, he said that it's a kind of reimagination of sorts of the things that we already use, during on the web, but with a fundamentally different model for the interactions between parties. And I think that's exactly also what we are talking about here. It's more a tool that it's like revolutionary for journalism that will empower journalists and will take it on the next level. And I think that when we think about the 90s, when we think about CNN reports, and when we think about broadcasting journalism, for sure, using like publishing any sort of information or on the internet, it was revolutionary during that time. Like publishing the first reports in 1995, for example, by CNN. I think that it really was revolutionary back then, where people will have to surf on the internet to search for their news. So I think that, yeah, on one side it can be like very chaotic, and it needs like more structure. But at the same time, I feel like Web3 journalism, it's more open, it's more transparent. And of course, it needs to work on like strong verification mechanism. And I think that here on both sides, like there needs to be like a sort of collaboration between the two, because we can't really say that traditional journalism, it's not it won't be like journalism anymore. I think that technology is just here to innovate, is just here to transform the way that we will perceive journalism, the way that we'll perceive like news consumption, for example.
Yeah, I really love what you said, and also, just to circle back to a point that you made earlier on, how does Web3 handle issues like fact checking and journalistic integrity when there's no central authority?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that in terms of there are like different tools that we can use for that. I think that's also when you have like a sort of ownership over certain news. For example, like when we think about these platforms like Mirror or Decrypt, like where people will be able to tokenize, like to be able to mint their news through NFTs. I think that this is like revolutionary, but at the same time, I think that we need to establish like a sort of guideline for how we perceive what is real, what is fake. And I'm pretty sure that's also through AI models will be able to do our fast checking and detect what is true, what is also false information. But at the same time, I think that it's also connected again to traditional journalism, where people will need to do that kind of fast checking manually, because I think that we can't just rely on machines to do that for ourselves. At the same time, I think that, as I was saying, it's quite chaotic, but it needs like more structure, and it needs like more verification through different models and also through different sources and platforms. I think that it's very hard to process, or it's very hard to determine what is true or what is false, because you can just rely on a machine to determine that. I think that, as I was saying, Web3 journalism, it's more community based. So I think that having more people being able to share their expertise and also their drive towards towards this kind of content that it's being released online. I think that's definitely helpful. But at the same time, I think that we really need to establish, okay, what is journalism and what is content creation, because they're also like different. That journalists are actually credited people. They need to have some sort of integrity when it comes to the kind of content that they're releasing. So I think that that's quite different. And that's also something that I witnessed in the past. There were a lot of people saying, okay, but what is journalism nowadays anyway? Because you will see a lot of people posting their content. They might have like a microphone, or they're just launching their podcast, and they are not necessarily journalists, but they are very successful with their content, and they have already their community, and they have people really feeling like their content is really credible and it's inspiring and it's educating a lot of people. So we really need to be careful when we are defining who's a journalist and who's a content creator. That's something that I really need to add here, because I feel like as a journalist you have like a special training, uh, also when it comes like to the fast checking, ensuring that the content, like that there is some sort of ethical integrity in terms of content, in terms of publishing, in terms of verifiable information. So that's something that I will probably add here.
Yes, because it's not just an opinion, right? Because you could say like content creation is kind of like you're just giving an opinion on something, whereas with journalists, you're really actually reporting from a place of integrity, right? What's the biggest thing Web3 journalism can learn from traditional media and vice versa?
That's a great question. And I think it's also connected to the previous question somehow, because when it comes to, most probably the biggest lesson is like the fast checking, the more structured research, and also the professional writing. And also like how you're building trust over time, because also these decentralized models, they need to establish more credibility rather than just relying on this open access. I think that's going back to the previous question, because it's also like connected. I think that there needs to be, for example, tokenized incentives where users can be, for example, this will be a great idea where users are rewarded for verifying these facts accurately, and also being penalized over spreading misinformation. That's why I'm saying that there needs to be a sort of guideline here. And also when it comes to the blockchain verification, like sources and edits, they need to be like, they can be like recorded on an immutable ledger, for example, making it harder to manipulate information. So there needs to be some sort of method established. Or for example, where users or this kind of decentralized autonomous organization can vote whether this is like like a accurate piece of information, or it lacks like accuracy. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons also that they can learn from each other. But going back to this question, I think that's one of the things that it can learn from traditional journalism is probably being able to create more trustworthiness, because when we're relying on these traditional media platforms, I mean, I never really heard of anyone like watching like CNN or watching like the BBC, like these more or less like trusted, like esteemed like media platforms. They all expect to hear facts. They have like some sort of credibility. And of course it's debatable also here, because on one hand you also have people relying a lot on social media, relying a lot on these kind of channels. And also when we think about social media, it's pretty much there's like some sort of similarities here, because who double checks all the information that it's spread on social media? Like there are still people debating whether their opinion is actually that's actually true or not. Like at the same time, there's also you have some sort of you have some sort of freedom, but at the same time, I think that you really need to have also fast checking tools on social media. Or, for example, one thing that I really noticed when posting on Instagram is that now you have this sort of etiquettes that it says, yes, this content was created using AI. And I think that it's building sort of trustworthiness over time. But I think that as journalists, we are still navigating through these challenges. And I think that whether we're using technology or not, traditional journalism will still be important. But probably reflecting on the biggest lesson is probably this kind of editorial standards and also the trust and the openness and also the decentralized content ownership. Like, I think that journalists should have like more control, over their work than they're tied like to corporate policies.
Yeah, I love that. And also, you brought up a really good point about AI, right? And we've seen AI making waves in content creation. How do you see AI influencing storytelling in Web3 journalism? Is it a tool for creativity or a challenge to traditional methods?
Oh, I think it can be both. I definitely embrace the use of AI, but also here we need to be very careful, as I was saying before. AI is both a powerful tool and is also a potential challenge for journalism, but also for Web3 journalism. So AI definitely helps in like it automates research and fast checking. AI can analyze like large data sets for investigative journalism, which we know that it's taking a lot of time. And one thing that I will add here is that when I was interviewing a managing director from Cloud Azure from Microsoft, he said that everyone in the future will be able to use AI without having the knowledge that they're actually using AI. So this is really fascinating about this technology, that it's like, it seems that it's kind of silent, but it's there. And one thing that I really embrace about using AI is probably definitely in the research process, as I was saying before, but can also, what is really helpful here, there are a lot of platforms that can generate translations, and they can also summarize a lot of they can also summarize a lot of information from different sources, and that's really helpful for journalists, because instead of like reading all these reports, which is taking a lot of time, because as a journalist you need to be very fast, you need to deliver accuracy, but at the same time you also need like to deliver the information very accurate, but at the same time also at the speed of the light. So you need to be very fast, because you're thinking about, okay, this technology, this information, this report needs to be released today. It's like very important, because you think about what's really newsworthy that really needs to be released. Like you think about a story that needs to be published, but at the same time I think that we are facing a lot of challenges in terms of fast checking, because we are really pressured about delivering that information. But also in terms of going back to the question, I think that AI is definitely boosting creative storytelling. A lot of people are embracing AI in generating, for example, different visualizations or interactive media, you know, engagement. But I think that at the same time, we need to think also at the challenges like of the deepfakes and misinformation and AI generating content that can spread false narratives, and also over reliance on this kind of automation. Like, I think that we need to reflect on what's ethical journalism that doesn't require AI. It really requires your own human judgment. And that's why I'm saying that not everyone could probably be a journalist, because it really requires some sort of ethical human judgment that only a journalist can have. I mean, it's a difference when you're expressing your opinion, and definitely that's why I really can affirm that Web3 journalism is a more sort of democratization of the media, and it's really revolutionary. But at the same time, I think that we really need to reflect on what's really important for us, and we really need to have some sort of incentives here. And I'm pretty sure that everyone has used like AI power tools like OpenAI, but at the same time, it's nice to play with these kind of tools. And when we think about the newsroom, how you can play with AI, it can definitely also in the traditional media journalism, it can really be helpful. But at the same time, you really need to dwell also on the fact that it can really be drastic. It can also be disruptive. So yeah, that's my take on that.
Yeah, I mean, like, at the end of the day, tech is like a double-edged sword, right? Like you can use it for good or for bad. And I think, I really love what you said about, being ethical in the way we approach this, because trust is so, so important, right? In this landscape. Where do you gather your inspiration from, and when it comes to other journalists and their approach to creative storytelling? Are there specific influences or styles that shape your work in Web3?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. I think that we all get inspired by different journalists. Even as a journalist myself, I always praise other journalists. One of them is definitely Sophia Smith-Gaylor. She's close to my age, and I think that her storytelling and journalism, it's brilliant because it's more than just. I like the fact that she's also very open about like using these kind of tools and technology, but at the same time, she's really innovating the way that will pave through journalism. And at the same time, I like the fact that she's really providing these kind of tools to kind of revolutionize the way that we'll perceive journalism. But at the same time, it's nice when a person is like a storyteller, a native storyteller, and it's adding this kind of human sides. But at the same time, it's also the combining these kind of elements like the human element and also technology, like creating a chat box, for example, where you're really giving all sorts of information because that's what a chat box does, right? But at the same time, you see that in the content creation sides, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of creativity, and the time invested in creating this kind of reels that will at some point, maybe some of them will go viral. So at the same time, it's creativity, maybe it's also some sort of science. But I like also to reflect on this kind of independent journalists at the same time. And also when it comes to Web3, I like to be part of these communities where everyone is empowering each other. We will have a sort of Web3 journalists, we will have sort of researchers, and they all come together to share their knowledge and at the same time to verify everything. And I'm really inspired, especially by investigative journalists, because I think that they're doing all this kind of hard work when they need to think about like fraud detection, when we're debating about different topics, or when we think about these platforms. I was actually interviewing someone who developed like a fraud detection platform that's actually functioning. It focuses on it's called Typing DNA, and it's a very interesting platform. And I'm definitely I'm definitely glad and happy to see that these advancements like are helping to shape like a better word and also more trustworthiness and what we're building like building like something more positive for humanity that can be in use of humanity.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm gonna throw a spanner into the works, right? Some argue that Web3 journalism isn't actually journalism, but rather citizen reporting with no oversight. How would you respond to that?
I'll probably say that not necessarily. I think we really need to reflect on. I think that it really depends on the platform and verification mechanism used. The concerns when it comes to many Web3 media platforms, I think it lacks a little bit of traditional editorial oversight. And this
Mm.
can probably lead to misinformation when we think about it. Of course, when you think about the potential on the other sides, like decentralized verification, open source, fast checking, it can definitely improve the credibility over time. Of course, when you're just like reflecting on a random tweeter, like on a random user, falsely claiming that, for example, a crypto project is like a scam and it's causing like panic over time. I think that's your mission as a journalist to really do your research there, to really and it's very hard. It's not simple. I would say that it's definitely still a challenge to many journalists. And um, I think that's a good Web3 journalism is where you have like a decentralized fast checking community helping you, also supporting you, and also defining a really good structure that can help you over time. That's why I'm saying that technology and these kind of tools, they're really helpful where you can, mint NFTs, where you can have like more freedom. But at the same time, it's still a challenge in terms of trustworthiness, I would say. And you can never just rely entirely on technology, because technology is just here to help, is just there to uplift the kind of content that you already have. And it's definitely helping the content creation process. It's definitely supporting you as a journalist. And many newsrooms, I think that they acknowledge that, to some, they acknowledge the potential of technology. But at the same time, I think that it's a difference when you're just referring to the words, when you're just referring as a journalist, or when you're just referring as a simple user that is just claiming that something is true, that is just claiming that, hey, I use this product, I think that this product is just a scam. And it's something that it happens very often in the Web3 field, and especially in the crypto. And I think that also when it comes especially to crypto projects, this can happen very often. And it's challenging, I think, also it's challenging everyone. It's not just challenging journalists. I think that it challenges your critical thinking.
Hmm. Yeah, I love it. I love what you said there. And here's a fun question. Who do you trust more to deliver news? The New York Times, a Twitter influencer with 100,000 followers, or a DAO where everyone votes on what's true?
Oh, I love this question. It's definitely a funny question. Oh, gosh. I think that, first of all, I would define that influencer, it's not equal journalist. I think that it doesn't matter how many followers you have as a journalist. You can have also 5K followers, and you can be a credible journalist. I definitely interviewed, for example, David Schuckman. He's a brilliant journalist who has been working at the BBC for over, I think, over 30 years, and he was a science editor there. And I like to meet and to chat with people who are also. I also like to chat with technologists and experts, but at the same time, it's great to see this kind of contrast between people who have worked just in the traditional media field, and they have been there to experience. For example, they've been to the Arctic. They did like many interesting trips, and they were reporting live. They were reporting from certain places, like different places in the world, and it's really nice to see that they are sharing their expertise based on their own experience as reporters, for example. And I would rather trust someone who actually proved that he can also use technology. I think that's nothing bad in using technology to kind of empowering this process. But at the same time, I'll definitely use someone who definitely has proven to have a sort of expertise in a certain field. And you can be a great journalist and you can have maybe less followers. I think it doesn't really matter. But I think that's what people really do lack online. It's like their critical thinking and their own judgment over what is really credible online. And you also have, I think that in the past, when we think about fast checking and when we think about probably that time during the pandemic where it was like a global chaos online, and they were spreading a lot of false narratives and also about vaccines, about like any sort of information. I think it's really challenging as a journalist when you really have to dwell and reflect and to do your own research, and to really shut down like these kind of rumors falsely spread online. And that's why I'm saying that sometimes the internet can be it can always be a safe place, because when you think about all these false rumors and narratives, like sometimes you just want to switch off and to just like. And I think also as a journalist, I mean, you sort of need and don't need these kind of platforms, because if you're really an experienced journalist, then you want really, when you rely just on these kind of traditional media channels For example, when we think that 10 or 20 years ago, most journalists, they were trained to actually write scripts. They were trained to do like their work more manually and to work in a newsroom. It was definitely a different environment, and now we just have like this flexibility of working. You can also work from home. You can also report from different places of the world. You can definitely just type something and you'll get like more than 10,000 pages, or sorts of information for that sort of topic. But replying to your question, I think that's it's definitely hard to determine here what it's really who I will trust more. I have to say it can be it can also be an influencer as long as he has done like his diligent like work on providing me all the necessary facts to prove that that information is like really credible, and it's not like this kind of sensationalism, because I feel like influencers are more, their main focus is probably they're also sometimes like collaborating with different brands, and they're like supporting this kind of brands or this kind of topics. They're just for their own benefit. I will say that's
Yeah.
what they're called, like influencers. We really need to think about these kind of terms. But also when we think about like this kind of news style, like decentralized media where everyone can actually vote, I think this can be like a good tactic, like a good plan, like a good structure. This could offer like a good structure, but at the same time, I will probably
They could also vote on like stuff that's not true, right? I mean, that's a
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's why
And, sorry,
exactly.
go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's why it's like very hard to say, like, just because you're writing for a very famous newspaper that has like specific guidelines, it doesn't really necessarily prove that that person is 100% right, because I think that it's very hard to meet like someone who's like completely neutral and unbiased, and of course like they're just focused on like reporting like facts. But at the same time, we really need to think about all the narratives. We need to think about like the organization like standing behind them. And I think that facts are speaking louder than than words. And
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that kind of stood out for me was, something that you said is do your own research, right? And I think whether it's, the New York Times or a Twitter influencer or even a DAO, we need to do our own research because, and again, just going back to something you said, it's about critical thinking, and there's definitely a slight lack of it. I think so. Yeah, I just kind of come back to what you said earlier on about, doing your own research and having a little bit more critical thinking in the way we approach these news, so to speak. So if you had to bet on it, which model, Web3 or traditional journalism, will dominate in 10 years?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, definitely. I think that it's hard to predict what will dominate. I am pretty sure that technology will be there to serve humanity. So, well, definitely a hybrid model will likely emerge, like combining like the best of both worlds. I would say traditional journalism will definitely, or I hope at least that will adopt like blockchain for more transparency, and Web3 platforms could integrate like more editorial standards to improve the credibility, and maybe thinking about also the monetization process, like decentralized funding models that will become more common, like reducing like reliance on corporate advertising. When we think about like major outlets like Reuters that could use, for example, that's just an example, they could use blockchain technology to verify their sources. And when we think about Web3 platforms like Mirror that could like fund like investigative reporting through community support. I think that it's definitely nice to see or to predict like how they could like how Web3 journalism although it's like still evolving, but it has like a lot of potential to disrupt like these traditional media, and like making reports like more transparent, uh, and remove like this sort of like censorship, like where people have like more more freedom to report. I think that it's definitely hard to predict like which model will probably be the most significant in the next 10 years. But I would say that definitely decentralized media has a lot of potential. And when we think about these Web3 platforms like Mirror, for example, where you're able to mint like articles through NFTs, and when you think about like, for example, using these tokens also to get like exclusive content where you can monetize your content, like if you have done like your research properly and you really have a lot of expertise and you really add value to that sort of topic, then of course, like you really need to be compensated like fairly, where you're not just relying on these kind of traditional media platforms where you definitely have like more freedom. And also when you think about like this DAO, like where people could be able to vote, for example, okay, what you're really interesting to know, like what kind of research, like that's something that I would really like to know. And yeah, to have like these trusted sources where, or when you think also about like another Web3 platform that I just had in mind was probably Paragraph, where you can use like talking getting like newsletters. It's definitely the quality that's really need to stand out. I think that these platforms will just be like I mean, it's when I think about like traditional media journalism, I still think of it like, just normal journalism, but it's like using this kind of technology that will just empower it. It's just using a different platform. It's like thinking about like social media. Definitely before social media, maybe people they were just reflecting on the kind of information that they were just hearing, like relying on these kind of sources like TV station or radio station. And I think that's also when they started like launching their podcast, like when this term was like firstly coined in the 2000s. I think that that was also sort of revolutionary during that time, because actually a journalist was actually launched this kind of platform. That's why I'm saying that it's just a continuation. It's like thinking of the continuation of the internet. I think that it's the same for journalism, like providing different platforms and different tools. But at the same time, we are on the same mission to really deliver more accuracy and provide like more credibility and trustworthiness, and to really make sure that it's really also genuine, that it's coming from you, because we don't want just to have like plenty of machines or robots like reporting in the future. When I was like interviewing someone that has traveled to China a couple of times, and I hear about like or I hear reports that will be like maybe the last generations that will be like fully humans, and in the future you will have like these machines like being able to, let's say to be there, like to replace humanity. It really makes me sad. I think that a machine will never be able to replace humanity. You still have that kind of genuine. It's like artists and NFTs. I think that at the same time it's like having this ownership and control over how you really choose to deal with your content, to really interact, like how you like people to interact with your content. I think it's the same thing here as a journalist. And I really, I really hope that humanity will be here to prosper and to learn. And as following also the discussions that we had in Davos, I think that AI will be also here to stay and to uplift humanity, and we really need to upskill, because we might also have like different jobs in the next 30 years and even in the next 10 years. And I think that's we really need to keep up with technology at the same time. And I think it's the same for Web3, and people really need to recognize its potential. And I do too as a journalist.
Yeah, I mean, I always love to kind of, encourage people that we need to think about a humanity first culture, and to cultivate that, right? Because if not, I think, we might lose our humanness and, especially if we don't prioritize our humanity. Yeah, so thank you so much for that. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'm not sure if I'm pretty sure that I'll have like plenty of things to add, like probably just to never really stop like being creative and never stop like asking questions when I think about all these revolutionary people from the traditional media field on one hand, when I think about Larry King, or when I think about like some of my favorite writers, when I think about Stephen King. I think it's always like combining some sort of adding your personal touch, because they were not just journalists. They were like, their mission was, as storytellers, and also informing people, also educating people about different topics, and providing these sort of incentives, like providing them with a lot of insights from a certain topic. But at the same time, it's always, I would say, that never stop asking questions. And as a journalist, I think that's the most important thing to do, whether that is traditional journalism or Web3 journalism. I think that's definitely something that you should never stop doing. And also cultivating yourself with like different books. For example, one book that I'm really reading right now, and that it's really like mind blowing and revolutionary for me, it's definitely 10 Visions for the Future by Kai Fu Lee, where it's really providing a lot of insights on what kind of predictions we have, like about quantum computing, about this deep tech, about technology, about AI, and how we can, what kind of interesting use case it will have for the future. And I'm pretty sure that it explains you in simple terms, and it's really translating this kind of complexity of technology. That was also the same mission that I had as a journalist when I created Sitex Swiss, to be able to connect with people. I think that's one thing that maybe in Web3 journalism you should be able to do, to really connect genuinely with people, and to really inspire them, to really be able to also inspire them to create their own content. That's one thing that I will add.
Fantastic. And Carina, this has been such an eye-opening conversation. You've given us a lot to think about. So thank you so much.
I really hope so. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
And to everyone tuning in, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow, share, and we'll catch you next time.